fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Alexander Jackson. Cedar Rapids is a city in Lynn County, Iowa, United States. It is the industrial and cultural center of the state, with a population of about 130,000. It exemplifies the blend of modern urban living with rural traditions in America. Jackson's family used to live on Oak Street, Cedar Rapids, and then they moved to Oregon. The Jacksons were a well-off family and had a harmonious family life. The children were well-behaved and did not exhibit any aggressive behavior. The Jacksons relocated in September 2011. Jan and Melissa Jackson purchased a 320-square-meter house for $400,000. Their two children were Alexander, known as Alexander, and their younger daughter Sabrina, with a 1.5-year age gap between them. Jan retired after a successful career in information technology, while Melissa, who had been a photographer, became a stay-at-home mom after their children were born to focus on raising them. Their family could afford their children's college education and yearly vacations to resorts, and they lived in a large, beautiful house. In the evenings, the parents prioritized spending quality time with their children, engaging in activities such as watching movies or playing board games. They also engaged in lively discussions on various topics, including economics and the children's future. Alexander, though quiet and shy, but he easily makes friends. On the contrary, Sabrina is more outgoing and talkative. After finishing school, Alexander developed a passion for video games, often playing late into the night and chatting online with friends. He graduated from Kennedy High School in 2019. During that time, Alexander played the flute, and Sabrina played the oboe in the school symphony orchestra. Here, he partnered with an organization to create a project to renovate a house in the historic downtown area. He spent many hours painting the interior house to make it habitable for low-income families. His efforts were featured in the local newspaper, highlighting his dedication to socially beneficial project. Additionally, he participated in scouting. Sabrina excelled in her studies and was very active. In December 2019, she represented the presidential candidate during his visit to Sedora Pizza to discuss global warming issues. It was likely during this time that her brother, Alexander, began to feel distant from her. On the contrary, his father, Jan, are very close to him. However, Melissa and Sabrina behaved in ways that irritated him, particularly their lack of understanding or acceptance of his interest in gaming. Their differing views on life frustrated him, and when he discovered that Sabrina planned to vote for an independent candidate in her first election, his disdain for her grew. Perhaps he had harbored resentment all along, but it was only now that he realized how different his sister, Sabrina, was from him. At that moment, he realized that he would no longer be able to look at her the same way as before. Nor would he be able to cherish her the way he used to. Sabrina and Alexander were opposites in many respects: academics, extracurricular activities, and personality. Sabrina was a strong student, while Alexander did not, though he had no help for substance abuse issues. His difficulties were with his studies. This caused conflict with his father. Initially, they gave him a chance, but his grades continued to decline. He managed to complete only one semester, then, his academic performance plummeted, resulting in failed exams. He had previously worked at the university food court but eventually quit that job as well. Alexander always dreamed of opening his own business, but he didn't know how to achieve it. At the end of the semester, when the children returned to their parents' house for the summer, Jan learned about his son's problems with his studies. Alexander, unable to hold back, he decided to take drastic measures. He gave Alexander an option: find a job or move out if he didn't want to continue studying. At that moment, Alexander felt a betrayal that hurt. On the morning of June 15, 2021, everything seemed routine. The neighbors had no idea that just a few doors away, in a house basement, lay the body of a man who had been shot. At 8:23 a.m., Alexander called 911, reported encountering a weaponed man at his home. He said the intruder came up from the basement, where his father, Jan, was staying. The intruder then shot his entire family and injured him. When the officers arrived, they discovered a blood-soaked scene with 3 bodies in different rooms. Doctors later confirmed that Jan, Melissa, and Sabrina were all deceased, each suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. They had been shot at point-blank range, with a total of 10 bullets fired. The police searched the property and quickly found a Browning .22 semi-automatic rifle, which had been used in the crime. Surprisingly, the neighbors had neither heard nor noticed the gunshots. During the investigation, detectives discovered that Jan had left a rifle on the fireplace, making it easily accessible. It was used in the family's murder. He had left it there after cleaning it the previous day. Normally, the rifle was stored in a locked gun cabinet. It is believed he was taking the stairs to the basement when he was shot. The killer then shot him 2 more times in the head. The killer proceeded to Sabrina's bedroom and shot her in the chest and stomach. Finally, he found Melissa's mother in the main bedroom and shot her in the head, leaving her body on the floor. Alexander described the attacker as a dark-skinned man, wearing green sneakers and black clothing. During the investigation, investigators found no signs of forced entry and no valuables were missing. The shooter's motive and method of entry into the house remained unclear. Investigators quickly questioned all the neighbors and collected CCTV footage. Reviewing the footage revealed that no one entered or left the house, caused many doubts about Alexander's testimony. The house was isolated, located on a hill with only one access road. Behind it were bushes that police thoroughly searched, looking for a hidden escape route for the attacker, but found none. Detectives begin investigating family matters and discover that Alexander has recently clashed with Jan and has a strained relationship with Melissa and Sabrina. He admitted to these issues, and it was speculated that the motive could be an inheritance of around $2 million. He was evidently hiding something, which was the first suspicion of the police officers. After being wounded, he was taken to the hospital for medical care, and the officers continued to interrogate him during the ride. Many of his statements were inconsistent. For instance, he initially told dispatcher 911 that all members of his family were shot, except him. However, in the ambulance, he appears surprised to learn that his sister, Sabrina, has also died. Alexander claimed he slept until 8 a.m., but it was discovered that his social media was active at 6 a.m., contradicting his story. Additionally, a pool of blood was found next to his bed, and forensic examination determined that he had shot himself in the leg at that spot, then bandaged the wound, went downstairs, and met the police. This contradicted his claim that an attacker shot him while he was downstairs. The nature of the wound made detectives suspicious, as the examination showed he shot himself in the leg. The bullet's trajectory and skin burns indicated a close-range shot. Detectives don't believe that a stranger who shot Alexander's entire family would leave him alive. The police tried to persuade Alexander to confess, but he continued to maintain his innocence. After recovering, he was arrested and sent to prison. Bail was set at $3 million, but he did not have that much money and remained in custody. He was charged with the murder of Sabrina, Jan, and Melissa. There was no doubt that Alexander was guilty. He is the only one in the family alive and had a motive. However, for the trial, physical evidence was needed. So investigators continued to collect evidence. According to police, since the 1982 Sitter Pizza case, this is the next known triple murder. The massacres shocked local residents, especially those close to the Jackson family. Their family has lived peacefully in their suburban home for 10 years, and everyone has always felt the family is very united. Part of the trial was conducted via online video because Alexander was recovering from injuries, but he later appeared in court. During the video, he was seen using crutches. The initial investigation focused on the gun used in the murder, which had 3 fingerprints on it. One of them was a fingerprint of the left palm, completely intact and matching Alexander's fingerprints. The second fingerprint is the fingerprint of the right palm, slightly blurred, also matching his. The third fingerprint was too blurred to be recognized. Fingerprints on the rifle suggest it may have been cleaned after killing the Jackson family. Alexander then picked up the gun, pointed the barrel at his feet and shot himself, leaving fingerprints that he did not wipe off. According to experts who spoke at the trial, this rifle has a very special loading and firing mechanism. Even experienced weapons experts have to spend a lot of time and effort to fully understand this type of weapon. The chance that a random burglar, who somehow avoided all cameras, could enter the house, figure out how to use the rifle, load it, and shoot 3 people was extremely low. That seems hard to believe, especially since Alexander is a good shot. He learned to shoot as a scout, and his father also taught him at the shooting range using that exact rifle. Law enforcement officers inspected the house's doors. It was a large residence with multiple entrances and exits, but police found no signs of forced entry at any of the entrances. Only the family members had keys to the house. The prosecution presented its version of incident as follows: Alexander had an argument with his father, Jan, about his academic problems. As a result, Jan told him to either move out or get a job. At that time, he had only $30 in his account. He had nowhere to go and didn't want to work, which became his motive for murder. He noticed that the rifle was easily accessible and saw this as his opportunity. In a fit of anger, he attacked and shot January, fearing that the rest of his family, Melissa and Sabrina, might witness his crime. He killed them too to eliminate any witnesses. He staged a fight, shot himself, and then called 911, claiming that a stranger with a rifle was responsible. The prosecution argued that his fabrication of the robbery story showed he had malicious intent, and he carefully planned it, aiming to avoid responsibility for the murder. The defense argued that these were mere assumptions, not backed by solid evidence. Many witnesses, including neighbors, testified that none of the family members were violent. They had no issues with alcohol, drugs, or mental health. They were all known to be friendly and welcoming. The family has never been in trouble with the law. Many people disagreed with the police's theory that Alexander killed his relatives. Despite some disagreements, but he had no strong motive to harm his family. The lawyer highlighted that he had no history of mental illness or violence. He hasn't had any problems with the law, not even minor infractions like parking tickets. Alexander consistently denied killing his family. He claimed he was shot in the leg by a masked intruder while struggling to get the rifle back. At the time of the incident, Melissa was 68, Jan 61, Sabrina 19, and Alexander was 20 years old. On March 3, 2023, Alexander Jackson was found guilty of the first-degree murder of his family. He was sentenced to 3 life sentences, one for each family member he killed. According to the jury, the court denied him parole. He is under surveillance due to the high risk of ending his own life. This is a common practice in prison for new inmates with life sentences. His defense team immediately filed a motion to request a new trial, but their request was denied. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sandra Gallas. Sandra was born on May 15, 1978 in Japan. Her background was a mix of half Japanese, a quarter Hawaiian, and a quarter Portuguese. Sandra had an older brother, Lawrence, who always looked out for her. After Larry retired early from the military, her parents, Larry and Tashi, decided to move to Hawaii. Turns out, Hawaii is Larry's hometown. They settled on the island of Kauai, fulfilling their long-held dream of living in Hawaii. They instantly fell in love with the stunning island and found the locals to be extremely kind and welcoming. By the age of 4, Sandra was practicing gymnastics, and by 5, she was learning the traditional Hawaiian hula dance. She studied very well and became a very beautiful girl. Sociable, cheerful, and active, she made many friends. After graduating from high school, Sandra attended New York University to study journalism. Although she dreamed of becoming a journalist, her life took a different path. As someone from an island, she found New York City overwhelming, with its towering, makes her feel suffocated. She didn't enjoy living there and visited her parents in Hawaii, missing them greatly. After graduating, Sandra returned to Hawaii, where she met Darren Gallas, who was working as a builder at the time. Darren was captivated by Sandra's beauty, and they began dating in 1999. With her parents' blessing, they got married, and Sandra took his last name. They bought their own house, on the island of Kauai. They appeared to be a happy, loving family. Sandra and Darren had 2 sons. A year after their wedding, they welcomed their first child, Austin. 2 years later, their youngest son, Braden, was born. Sandra took care of the children and managed the household. She and Darren love their sons very much and always try to do the best for them. However, their relationship gradually deteriorated. In 2005, Sandra discovers Darren has been having affairs with 2 married women. She found their phone numbers among his belongings. After she called them, they confessed to having affairs with Darren. She decided to end the marriage and filed for divorce. She could not bear his infidelity any longer. In June 2005, Darren moved out of the family home, while Sandra and their children remained there. Sandra changes her hairstyle to enter a new phase of life. Sandra started working as a waitress at a restaurant on the island to support herself and her children. Her goal was to become financially independent and no longer rely on Darren. Sandra's kind, polite, and friendly nature made her a favorite among the restaurant's guests and staff. It was there that she met Ryan Shinjo, a chef. He was calm, polite, and courteous, the exact opposite of Darren. As they spent more time together, a romance blossomed. Sandra felt comfortable and at ease with him, something she hadn't had in a long time. Ryan made her happy, and their relationship grew deeper and deeper. On weekends, they would often take trips to Honolulu. And Ryan would shower her with gifts. Sandra's parents were overjoyed to see their daughter happy again after a difficult divorce. Sandra and Ryan had plans to move in together, but unfortunately, those plans were not meant to be. Soon, tragedy struck. On January 25, 2006, 27-year-old Sandra was brutally murdered. That morning, before going to work, Ryan visited her. But when he knocked on the door, there was no answer. This was unusual, because they had agreed that he would stop by to visit her before going to work. He began checking the area around the house to understand what was going on and found that the garage door was closed and the lights were still on, meaning someone must be inside. He thought it was Sandra and that she simply hadn't heard the knocking at the door. Ryan looked out the garage window, and he saw a strange sight inside. Inside the car, Sandra was half lying down and unresponsive. Concerned that she might be suffocating from exhaust fumes, he screamed and called her name. But she did not answer. Panicked, he rushed to a neighbor's house, about half a kilometer away, for help. Together, they managed to open the garage door. Upon entering, he touched Sandra. He found her body was already cold. Immediately, he called 911 to report that Sandra was not showing any signs of life. Sandra, 27, was pronounced dead by paramedics. Police began examining her body, which was found inside the car. She was partially lying down, with her lower body in the driver's seat and her upper body thrown back onto the front passenger seat. It was clear that Sandra had been dead for some time and had been attacked. Her body showed signs of beating and had lacerations on his neck, indicating that she had been murdered. Forensic experts searched the crime scene for evidence, but found none. There were no CCTV cameras or witnesses in the area. Police suspected that Sandra had been trying to escape from someone, as it appeared she had been in a hurry to leave. She had been getting ready quickly, got into the car, but didn't have time to drive away. Instead, she was attacked, knocked down, and strangled. Investigators found no signs of robbery in the house. Valuables were still in their places, and there was no sign of disarray. Sandra was not raped, so what could have been the motive for the murder? Meanwhile, Sandra's parents were visiting their son in Texas and never imagined that something like this would happen to their daughter. In the morning, Sandra's boss called her because she hadn't shown up to work. This worried them, as Sandra was always known to be hardworking and responsible. When her parents tried calling her, she didn't answer. By evening, they received the devastating news about their daughter's murder and rushed back home. The brutal killing shocked everyone on the island. The locals were scared and worried that a serial killer might be on the loose on the island, posing a threat to them. People asked the police to explain, but the authorities reassured the people. They believed it was a crime with a personal motive, meaning it was intentional and targeted. Hawaii generally has a very low crime rate compared to the national average, except for certain disadvantaged areas on the island of Oahu. Detectives were committed to solving the case quickly to reassure the island's residents. Investigators believe the brutal nature of the death suggests a personal motive, so they considered ex-husband and current lovers as suspects. Ryan, the current lover, discovered Sandra's body. Darren, her ex-husband, had a strained relationship with her, and their divorce was nearing finalization. Darren is very sad about their divorce, and he became enraged upon learning about her affair with Ryan. Additionally, Darren and she was embroiled in a heated custody battle, which caused constant conflict. As a result, investigators questioned both suspects, Darren and Ryan, at the scene. First, they interrogated Darren. He stated that the day before the incident, he had picked up the children according to the court-ordered schedule. He took them to kindergarten in the morning, painted his mother's room while they were away, and then picked them up, spending a pleasant time with them. Darren claimed that when Sandra was supposed to pick up the children in the afternoon after work, but instead, the police came to him with bad news about her death. Darren claimed he was not involved in Sandra's death. Even though they are divorced, they still maintain a peaceful relationship and keep in touch for the sake of their children. Initially, he spoke confidently, but his actions showed the opposite. In the middle of the interrogation, he became nervous, confused his statements, and raised the police's suspicions. He could not provide verifiable alibis. At the time of the tragic incident, their children were too young to give statements, being only 3 and 5 years old. According to Darren, he was home alone at the time. But he failed the polygraph test. Turns out, he never called Sandra to check why did she come home late, which was unusual, leading investigators to suspect him of Sandra's murder. A search warrant for his home has been issued. The police discovered that a room remained unpainted, contradicting his claims. This suggested he might have had the opportunity to go to Sandra and kill her. After thoroughly inspecting the house, investigators found nothing relevant to the case. Despite their suspicions, the detective had to let Darren go home. They interviewed people close to he and Sandra, including her parents, all suspected him of having something to do with her death. He was known to be extremely jealous and controlling. He did not want to leave her and opposed the divorce until the last minute. Sandra had no enemies. Her family and relatives believe that Darren is the only person who could be her killer. Sandra's new lover, Ryan, provided an alibi. Although he failed a polygraph test, he was removed from the list of suspects. An autopsy revealed that Sandra died from strangulation, with characteristic marks on her neck and hemorrhages in her eyes. Her body also showed multiple injuries, indicating a painful death. Detectives were convinced that Darren was directly involved in her death, but they lacked the evidence to prove it. 2 years later, Sandra's undershirt was re-examined. During this detailed investigation, DNA was found and sent for analysis. The results revealed that Darren's DNA was present on her undershirt. This led authorities to consider charging him with murder, as it was considered vital evidence. However, the prosecutor decided against pursuing charges due to insufficient evidence. Before the murder, they were in regular contact and saw each other, especially when he came to pick up the children. Therefore, it is possible that his DNA accidentally got on her clothes without being related to the murder. The children, Austin and Braden, lived with their father, Darren. He had been granted full custody. The loss of their mother, Sandra, at such a young age was a significant shock for them. Austin and Braden's maternal grandparents have requested custody of the 2 children, citing Darren's aggressive behavior and his endangerment of the children. They believed he was responsible for Sandra's death and accused him of alienating the children from their grandparents. Despite these accusations, the court awarded full custody to Darren. He later married his new girlfriend, Kyron, and moved on with his life. As time passed, the investigation made no progress. Sandra's parents maintained regular contact with investigators, determined to seek justice for their daughter. From the moment he learned of Sandra's murder, her father vowed to continue to find the culprit so that he could be punished by the law. Thanks to the persistence of Sandra's parents and their close cooperation with the police, the case was eventually solved. The family offered a $20,000 reward to anyone providing information leading to the arrest and conviction of their daughter's killer, but still no one spoke up. It was not until 2012 that a team of investigators was assigned to look into the case. They reviewed all the materials with a fresh perspective and discovered some other details. In the documents, they found letters from Sandra to the attorney handling her divorce. These letters showed that her relationship with Darren was very strained. The letters revealed that she was afraid of his aggressive behavior. He had threatened her, was unhappy about her new relationship, and had harassed her. The most important evidence is the sign that Darren is a fussy person. Sandra mentioned that he was so meticulous and organized in everything he did, to the point that he wrote down in his diary every time she was upset about something, no matter how minor. This information intrigued the police, causing them to return to Darren's house to find and examine the diary. When they found out, they were shocked because he had kept detailed notes of every complaint about Sandra. He recorded every day of their life. For instance, he noted when she was 5 minutes late for a meet or bought the wrong kind of bread. However, there were no entries on the day before the murder, which puzzled the police because they knew he and Sandra had met, making it hard to believe that such a picky person would have no complaints to record. Sandra did not pick up the children on the day she died. Why didn't Darren note this in his diary or try to contact her? Perhaps he already knew she was dead and wouldn't be coming. Darren said he did not remember clearly what happened that day, which is why there is no diary entry for that day, even though he recalls other details clearly. His behavior seemed odd and unbelievable. Researchers speculated that he killed Sandra because he didn't want a divorce. In October 2012, Darren was charged with second-degree murder, with bail set at $1 million. He managed to post bail, allowing him to stay home during the trial preparation. Darren maintained his innocence. His lawyer pointed out that there was no evidence against him except DNA on the clothes, which might have ended up there for legitimate reasons, as he often picked up the children. All other evidence was circumstantial. despite disagreements with Sandra, but they had reached an agreement on the division of property and shared custody. Therefore, the defense argued, Darren had no motive to kill her. Additionally, Darren's attorney asked investigators to turn their attention to Ryan Shinju, who was romantically involved with Sandra at the time of her death. Ryan had a criminal history related to burying illegal substances. However, he denied all accusations against him, citing an alibi for the time of Sandra's death. He also cooperated fully with the investigation. He attributed his past criminal record to youthful mistakes and emphasized that he has not committed any offenses since then and has shown no inclination toward violence. Sandra's relatives and friends, called as witnesses for the prosecution, supported Ryan's statements. They described him as a kind person who Sandra felt very comfortable around. None of them believed Ryan could commit murder, especially since he had no motive. However, they had a different opinion about Darren. Darren was a cruel and domineering, he was someone Sandra feared. She avoided seeing him to avoid angering him. By court order, Sandra was forced to give Darren the opportunity to communicate with the children, even though she did not want to. Ryan added that he and Sandra planned to move in together for her protection against Darren. He suspects Darren is the person behind the crime, although there is no direct evidence. During the trial, Darren was portrayed poorly and was likely to be convicted. On his lawyer's advice, Darren accepted a plea bargain from the prosecution to reduce his sentence. This decision disappointed Sandra's family, but the prosecutor argued that a plea deal was the better option because without enough evidence, Darren could be acquitted. The prosecutor estimated a 50% chance of conviction, so Sandra's family agreed to the plea deal. In May 2018, 12 years after Sandra's murder, Darren pleaded guilty to first-degree assault on his wife, causing serious bodily harm. He did not provide any details about the crime. He was sentenced to imprisonment with the possibility of parole after serving 85% of his sentence. In March 2022, his minimum term was reduced by 6 months. He may be eligible for parole in 8 years, with the earliest release date being May 2, 2026, and the latest May 1, 2028. He is currently serving his sentence in prison. Sandra's parents are still upset by the sentence, considering it unfair that Darren received only 8 to 10 years for a brutal murder. They believe he acted in a calculated, planning everything meticulously. He allegedly cleaned the crime scene thoroughly, wore gloves, and hid all evidence. He also provided a false, claiming he was painting walls, which was later proven untrue. Now that Sandra's parents are over 80, they live a peaceful and steady life. Her father had several heart attacks due to severe stress after losing his daughter. His biggest wish was to see Darren put in jail. Their son, Lawrence, often visits them from Texas. Sandra's parents hope Darren will one day feel remorse for his actions. Sandra lived a respectable life. Her children are now adults, living independently, no contact with maternal family, so little is known about them. Sandra's parents think Darren is the one who turned her children against her and her maternal family. During the trial, Sandra's children, then adults, sided with Darren and his parents. They do not believe that their father killed their mother. They attended all the hearings and, after Darren was convicted, cut ties with their mother's family. They believe that their mother's family put their father in prison. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Deanna Laney. Deanna Laney was known for being quiet, uncommunicative, and calm. She lived in a small town with a population of just 600. She was deeply religious and a member of the Pentecostal church, where her relative was the pastor, and she participated in the choir. People who knew Deanna were shocked by her actions, as no one suspected she might have mental health issues. She always appeared to be a loving, exemplary mother and wife. However, outside of the church, the family lived quite isolated from society. They had no close neighbors, and their home was situated on a large plot of land, distant from other houses. They chose to raise their children in the countryside, homeschooling them instead of sending them to public schools. Deanna, a housewife, is responsible for her children's education. This isolation likely contributed to others not noticing any problems with the seemingly loving mother. Their family lived in isolation from the outside world, to the point that only a small group of family members knew the details of Deanna's mental health problems. On the evening before Mother's Day, May 10, 2003, a 911 call was made from Northeast Texas. A calm female voice clearly told the dispatcher that she had killed her children. The dispatcher kept talking to the caller and guided her to the emergency service location. When police officers arrived at the small house in Chapel Hill, they identified it as the home of Deanna and Dale Laney. Inside, they found Deanna in pajamas, seemingly just woken up, looking confused as the police continued their investigation. Officers continued to search the area and eventually found the woman who had called 911. She was nearby in a small grove, wandering barefoot, in white pajamas covered in blood, still talking to the emergency dispatcher. It was 39-year-old Deanna Laney. She calmly informed the police that her son's bodies were behind the swings in the yard. The officers went to the spot she described and discovered the bodies of 6-year-old Luke and 8-year-old Joshua. Both boys were lying on the ground in their underwear, their heads so severely mutilated that they were unrecognizable. The children had suffered fatal head injuries. Experienced detectives said this was one of the most horrific crime scenes they had ever encountered. However, there were only 2 bodies. Officers were told by Dale that they had 3 children. Despite this, they continued searching for the youngest child. They entered the house and checked the children's room, where they discovered 1-year-old Aaron. He was still alive but severely injured, covered in blood, and a pillow was over his face. Aaron was immediately taken to the nearest children's hospital and then moved to the Dallas Medical Center for treatment of the terrible injuries caused by his mother, Deanna. Deanna was arrested, but she was unable to give a statement due to mental health issues. She claimed that God commanded her to kill her sons. She used stones to attack the heads of the 2 children, Joshua and Luke. Although the youngest child, Aaron, was seriously hurt, but the boy survived the incident. Investigators questioned Dale, suspecting that he might have heard or seen something, as the children were likely to scream during the attack. However, he was bewildered and didn't understand how his wife could commit such acts. He mentioned waking up that night to the cries of Aaron, which was unusual since the child typically slept soundly. He went to the nursery and found his wife standing over the crib in the dark. She reassured him that everything was all right and that she was just soothing the baby. Trusting her, he went back to bed and slept throughout the incident. He only realized the true nature of his wife's actions when it was too late. Police were unable to learn of any problems Deanna was experiencing from Dale or her relatives. It was later discovered that she was hallucinating, which made her intend to kill her child, supposedly under God's influence. Among all the friends and family interviewed, only her sister, Pam, noticed changes in her behavior. Recently, Pam informed investigators that she started acting differently. During this time, she barely ate and lost noticeable weight. She spent all her free time reading the Bible and occasionally said strange things. However, Pam didn't think much of it. After discussing Deanna's behavior with Dale, she dismissed her concerns and felt reassured. The police observed Deanna's erratic behavior while she was in custody. Her condition visibly changed before their eyes. She would sometimes collapse to the floor in a fetal position and crying. Then she might stand up and start singing church hymns. At times, she seemed to realize what she had done, resulting in a vacant stare. It was clear that she was at a high risk of ending her own life, so the police followed protocol. Deanna was placed under special supervision to prevent self-harm. This was necessary to conduct a psychiatric evaluation, which later took place in a psychiatric clinic. The doctors questioned Deanna, and she smiled as she recounted her actions toward her sons. She laughed sincerely, believing she had fulfilled God's will. She was convinced her children would be resurrected, but she felt the youngest, Aaron, should have died too. She regretted that this did not happen, as she believed it meant she had failed to fully comply with God's demands. As punishment for her actions, she drank water from the toilet and licked it off the floor during her hospital stay. Deanna explained that she had resisted God's will for a long time. She did not want to kill her children, which she thought angered him. He increasingly insisted that she fulfill what was predestined. The longer she resisted, the more severe the punishments he demanded. Ultimately, she felt she had to surrender and follow his will. Deanna compared her actions to those of Andrea, who killed her 2 children 2 years earlier under similar religious delusions. According to Deanna, after the end of the world, Joshua and Luke would serve as witnesses at the Last Judgment, which is why she ended her own life. Deanna confided to doctors that she felt fighting those voices was a selfish act to save her child, even though it meant she was disobeying God. Ultimately, she believed she made correct decision by submitting to the Lord's will. Deanna recounted that on the night of May 9th, she was awakened by what she believed to be a message from God, telling her that the time had come. She quietly got out of bed to avoid waking her husband. First, she went to Aaron's room, where she had previously hidden a large stone intended for a ritual act. She used the stone to strike the baby on the head several times. The baby cried out, so she placed a pillow over his face to silence him. Her husband, Dale, half asleep, entered the room. She reassured him that everything was fine, so he left and went back to sleep. He was unaware of the situation and missed the chance to save his children. Deanna kept the pillow on Aaron's face until she heard a gurgling sound and then stopped. Next, Deanna woke her 2 older sons, Joshua and Luke, and took them to the backyard garden. She led Luke aside, instructed little boy to dig in the ground, and then began hitting him on the head with a large stone. She struck him at least 8 times, crushing his skull. Afterward, she dragged his body behind the swing and placed a large stone on his chest, believing this would prevent him from breathing. She then spoke to God, saying this was all she could do for her son. Then, lightning struck, which she interpreted as a sign that Luke had died. Afterward, Deanna went back to the garden and began hitting Joshua. However, he was bigger and stronger, so and resisted his mother more. She then pinned his arms down and struck his head with a stone until he stopped moving. After this, she dragged his body behind the swing. Immediately after the act, she called 911 and confessed to the horrific crime. Aaron also suffered severely. Though the baby survived, the injuries were so serious that he was left disabled. The child lost his sight and independence, needing a wheelchair for the rest of his life due to his mother's abuse. The case of Deanna had many similarities to Andreas. Both women lived in Texas and homeschooled their children. They were deeply religious and believed their actions were for religious purposes. Both felt that they had no other option but to harm their children. They each called 911 afterward, and both were evaluated by the same psychiatrists before their trials. Deanna was aware of Andrea's case and often compared herself to her, but Deanna's trial unfolded very differently. Deanna appeared in court in late March 2004. The prosecution sought to punish her for 2 first-degree murders and aggravated assault on Aaron, requesting the death penalty, which is applicable in Texas. Alternatively, she faced 3 life sentences for her crimes. The defense lawyers argued that she was innocent due to insanity. They claimed that insanity was the only reason a religious mother, who loved and homeschooled her children, would kill two of them and harm another without showing any emotion. In Texas, at the time of the murder, the state had some of the strictest laws in the United States regarding the handling of murderers. Defendants had to prove they had a mental disorder during the crime and convince the court they couldn't distinguish right from wrong. 5 psychiatrists formed a team to evaluate Deanna's. The examination lasted 6 days, during which she cried almost continuously. She refused to look at photographs of her mutilated children and the crime scene. Some psychiatrists believed she was sane when she killed her sons, while others thought she couldn't distinguish good from evil due to religious hallucinations. Deanna shared with doctors several details that even those close to the Laney family, including household members and relatives, did not know. The doctors concluded that signs of mental disturbances began appearing more than 3 years ago. An early indication, similar to hallucinations, was Deanna smelling sulfur, which she believed came from her children and perceived as a demonic sign. Deanna also reported seeing Aaron playing with a spear. She claimed that God had shown her 3 methods for her to kill her son, using a spear or a knife, a stone, and strangulation. While doing chores in the garden before the massacre, Deanna tripped over a stone. She realized that the stone would become the main weapon she would use to sacrifice her sons. She didn't tell anyone about this, but openly claimed that the Lord had spoken to her. She shared this in church, warning parishioners about the impending end of the world. However, the congregation largely ignored her, as such statements were common in their religious tradition, which not everyone followed. During her initial psychiatric evaluation, Deanna showed no emotion and genuinely believed her children would be resurrected. After taking antipsychotic medication, she eventually understood her actions differently and felt remorse. Deanna was horrified to realize she had been suffering from hallucinations that drove her actions. During a psychiatric examination, it was determined that Deanna was insane when she committed the murders of her 2 sons, Joshua and Luke. The examiners concluded that she suffered from psychotic delusions that prevented her from distinguishing right from wrong at the time of the murder. However, the prosecutor disagreed with the diagnosis that Deanna was insane when she committed the murders. He argued that even if she believed she was doing God's will, she should have known that her actions were wrong according to state law. The prosecutor pointed out that her first action after the murder was to call 911, which indicated that she was aware of the wrongness of her actions. Additionally, when Dale entered the room, she attempted to hide what had happened, further suggesting that she knew her actions were wrong. The prosecution also stressed that when Deanna was unable to complete killing Aaron, she told God that he just needed to do the rest. This statement demonstrated to the prosecutor that she was aware of right and wrong. The prosecutor believed that her actions were intentional and planned, which is not consistent with the behavior of someone who is insane. Prison guards testified at the trial, describing Deanna's behavior in prison as unusually compliant. They rarely saw such conduct and believed she had serious mental health issues. The 911 call recording was part of the evidence the jurors considered. Her voice on the call was eerily calm. Jurors also requested a psychiatric report to understand why she stopped attacking Aaron, who was 14 months old at the time. However, they reached a verdict before receiving the report. Deanna sat near the portrait of her 3 children and cried loudly as the prosecutor recounted the horrifying incident of how she used a rock to hit her children. Her sons, Joshua and Luke, were struck on the head so severely that their brains were exposed, leaving their heads in a bloody state. Deanna's husband, Dale Laney, 47, attended the trial and was devastated by the loss of his 2 sons. He couldn't comprehend how this tragedy occurred and believed it was appropriate to commit Deanna to lifelong treatment in a clinic. In the end, Deanna was declared innocent due to insanity and had to be treated for mental illness at the hospital. Doctors expected her to need lifelong treatment and doubted her recovery. Dale divorced Dina after she was admitted to the psychiatric clinic in 2008. He eventually remarried and started a new family. He continues to care for his disabled son, Aaron. Deanna was closely monitored by psychiatrists for 8 years. In 2012, doctors determined that she no longer needed to stay in the hospital because she was healthy and did not pose a threat to herself or others. She was released on a number of conditions. She was to have no contact with minors. She needs court permission if she wants to change her address. Had to allow social workers to visit her at any time, and had to continue taking her prescribed medications and undergo drug and substance testing. Only a few people, including her lawyers, know where Deanna lives now. Her ex-husband, Dale, felt very angry when he learned that she was released from the psychiatric clinic. Many people in society also agree with Dale. They believe the killer of 2 sons should be imprisoned or face the death penalty. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Annie Tayan. Annie Tayan was born on May 1, 1965, in Charleston, South Carolina, and was raised by her mother. She had a strong love for life, dancing, fun, and the simple pleasures it brought. Annie dreamed of having a family and considered motherhood her greatest goal. She began this journey very early, giving birth to her first son, Jimia, at the age of 18, followed by her second son, Sean, just a year later. By the age of 20, she welcomed her third child, a daughter named Shane. Unfortunately, shortly after Shane was born, the children's father left Annie, became uninvolved in their lives, and abandoned the family. Annie faced the hardships of raising 3 young children in a rented apartment in Maine. In 1987, when her youngest daughter Shane was only 6 months old, Annie, 22, met Michael Palin, 32, a Navy officer stationed on the aircraft carrier Bramby. Their meeting took place in Portland, Maine, where Michael's ship was docked, and he felt an immediate attraction to Annie during their waterfront encounter. Michael lived in Charleston, South Carolina, and was a respected member of the Navy, known for his work as a computer systems operator. He was actively involved in military operations and had received several awards. Annie was fascinated by Michael's naval career and quickly fell in love with him, telling a friend that she had found a man she felt was truly worthy of her love. After dating for a few months, Annie and Michael decided to move in together, creating a family with 2 sons and a daughter. Unfortunately, their life together took a tragic turn when a fire broke out in their apartment. Annie was away at the time, leaving Michael with the children. Michael, along with Jimia and Sean, were able to escape, but Shane, who was too young to walk, was left behind. When Annie returned, she tried to enter the burning apartment to save Shane, but the neighbors prevented her. The loss of Shane in the fire had a profound effect on Annie. After the devastating fire, Annie and her sons moved to her mother's house in Portland. Meanwhile, Michael focused on his work and decided to stay in the barracks. A few months after the move, a disturbing event occurred near Annie's mother's house. A shed in the backyard was set on fire. The police quickly traced the source of the fire and found a lighter engraved with the name Bramby, the ship on which Michael served. This discovery made Michael the prime suspect in the arson case. However, despite the incriminating evidence, the police were unable to link him to the crime due to insufficient evidence. After the second fire, Maine child welfare authorities discovered that Annie's sons were living in unsafe conditions with her. As a result, they made the decision to remove Jimia and Sean from her custody and place them in the care of the Department of Social Services. This decision devastated Annie, who tried her best to regain custody of her children. But she was unsuccessful and lost custody of her sons. When Michael's ship returned to Charleston, South Carolina, he settled into a rental apartment and reunited with Annie. Despite their complicated past, Annie decided to move in with him in Goose Creek, a suburb of Charleston. However, While there, Annie discovered a photo of Michael wearing a wedding ring, revealing that he was married. When confronted, Michael confessed to Annie that he had been married but was now divorced. He explained that his ex-wife, Dawn Breeze, and their 3 children lived with his mother in Savannah, Georgia. Although Michael assured Annie that he was no longer in a relationship with Dawn, Annie was deeply troubled by this revelation. She considered leaving him but ultimately chose to stay, seeing Michael as a partner with whom to start a family. However, their living situation became negative. Michael became increasingly hostile and disrespectful to Annie. As she considered moving back to her mother's home, she discovered she was pregnant. This unexpected news kept her from leaving and brought her joy as she anticipated the birth of another child. In October 1989, Annie gave birth to her 4th daughter, Jade. Although she knew Jade could never replace her lost daughter, she felt that Jade filled an important void in her heart. In the month after Jade was born, Michael's treatment of Annie worsened. He began publicly insulting and humiliating her. Annie confided to a friend that she feared that if she tried to leave, Michael would relentlessly pursue her. His controlling behavior increased. He locked Annie in their apartment. When he left for work, he would disconnect his phone and take it with him. Annie became increasingly concerned about his actions. Annie, feeling distressed, called her best friend Katie French. During the call, Annie revealed that she was planning to leave Michael. However, Michael threatened that if she left, their daughter Jade would stay with him and Annie would never see her again. Overwhelmed, Annie cried and begged Katie to come immediately to help her and Jade. Unfortunately, Katie was busy and unable to help. Instead, she sent Annie money for a bus ticket, hoping that it would help her escape and return to Portland. This urgent conversation turned out to be their last. 2 days later, on November 7, 1989, Katie tried to contact Annie but received no response. A few days later, Michael informed Katie that Annie had left on November 6, taking her belongings and heading to an unknown destination. Katie expected Annie to contact her from her new home, but after 2 weeks of no news, she grew increasingly worried. By Thanksgiving, November 24, Annie had been out of contact for 20 days. Worried about Annie's safety, Katie tried to contact Annie's friends and acquaintances, but no one had any information about her. When Katie tried to report Annie Tayan, 24, missing to the police, she was told that she could not file a formal report because she was not a family member. As months passed without any updates on Annie, Katie finally contacted Michael's mother. Katie was shocked to learn that Annie's youngest daughter, Jade, was living with Michael's mother. The news confirmed Katie's deepest fears. She was certain that Annie would never willingly leave her daughter behind. Shortly after the disturbing events, Michael Palin moved to the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. He did not appear to be concerned about her disappearance. Michael did not contact the police or begin a search for Annie. The official search began after Annie's mother reported her missing. Initially, the investigation focused on her husband Michael Palin, who quickly became the prime suspect. Michael explained that on the morning of November 6, he woke up to find Annie had left, leaving their daughter with him. Michael said that the night before, Annie had mentioned that she wanted to end their relationship. Michael did not look for Annie because he thought their relationship was over and felt no need to contact her any further. He also claimed that he was unaware of Annie's disappearance. After searching the couple's rented apartment, the police found no evidence. Annie Tayan's case seemed to have stalled, with no further search for her. Questions about her current location, whether she was still alive, and the possible motives of any kidnappers remained unanswered. The only known fact is that the last person confirmed to have seen her was her partner, Michael. For 4 long years, there was no news or sign of Annie. Her best friend, Katie French, was the only one actively looking for her. She worked tirelessly on the investigation, and her phone bill alone cost her approximately $16,000. Katie hired a private investigator and was determined to continue the search. She contacted various organizations to gather information about Michael's background. Katie was convinced that Michael was dangerous and untrustworthy. She was terrified of him, knowing that if Michael learned of her ties to the police, it could put her in danger. In 1993, Annie's case was transferred to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, marking a major change in the investigation. Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents began a comprehensive review of the case from the beginning. They found Michael Palin, who was staying at Pearl Harbor Naval Base in Hawaii. When Coast Guard agents attempted to speak with him about Annie's disappearance, Michael agreed to speak only if his attorney was present. He then completely stopped cooperating with the investigation and refused to provide any further assistance or information. The Coast Guard agents gathered all available information about Annie's disappearance and contacted the South Carolina Police Department. They asked the department to cross-reference their records with any unidentified bodies, noting that Annie had given birth just a month before her disappearance. South Carolina police then reported a case involving a dead woman who had also given birth a month before her death. They provided a sketch of what the woman looked like, shocking the Coast Guard agents. They believed they had found Annie Tayan. The discovery revealed a brutal murder, with her body found next to a highway in Jasper County, South Carolina, about 100 miles from her home with Michael. The crime scene photos were horrifying. Annie's face was severely crushed, and her skull was broken into 124 pieces, requiring nearly 500 hours of detailed reconstruction. Her body was found in a duffel bag that had been doused with gasoline and set on fire. The burning bag was discovered at 6 a.m. on November 7, 1989, the same time Katie French noticed Annie had stopped answering her calls. Annie was identified by comparing her dental records to those of the unidentified woman. After Annie's body was found, Michael became the prime suspect in her murder. The Coast Guard developed a detailed investigation plan, starting with a review of his financial transactions. They discovered that on the day Annie went missing, Michael had made a credit card purchase about 25 miles south of where her body was found. Additionally, his phone records showed that on the morning of November 6, he called his mother's home in Savannah twice, once at 4:35 a.m. and again at 5:17 a.m. Based on this evidence, police believe that Michael killed Annie in their apartment, then moved her body and left it on the side of the road, where he burned it. Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents targeted Michael Palin's ex-wife, Dawn Breeze. At the time of Annie's death, Dawn was still married to Michael and lived in his mother's home in Savannah. After Annie went missing, Dawn divorced Michael and began moving around the state several times, apparently trying to avoid someone or something. Agents eventually tracked her down to Miami, Florida, in the summer of 1995, nearly 6 years after Annie Tayan's murder. When they found Dawn, she was making a living through psychic activities. During a visit to her workplace to discuss Annie's disappearance, Dawn responded surprisingly calmly. She asked how long the conversation would last, saying she wanted to eat if it lasted. This response surprised the agents, as they had expected a more emotional response regarding Annie. However, Dawn remained calm throughout their discussion. During the 10-hour interrogation, Dawn's story initially matched Michael's. She said that when she visited Michael's apartment, he told her that his mistress had left and that he planned to raise their daughter on his own. However, Dawn was silent, looked down, and said that she wanted to tell the truth. Her next speech was emotionless and tearless as she shared what she had kept secret for 6 years. Dawn revealed that Michael had called her to his Charleston apartment early one morning. She discovered Annie's body on the living room floor. Michael told Dawn to go into the bedroom to see his daughter. At the time, Dawn and Michael were still legally married and had 3 children together. Michael admitted to Dawn that he had had an affair with Annie, which resulted in the birth of a daughter. He begged her to accept the child and help him raise his daughter. Dawn claimed that rather than face a custody battle with Annie, Michael chose to kill to gain custody. Dawn added, on the night of November 5th and 6th, 1989, Michael and Annie went to bed after having sex. After a while, Annie fell asleep. At this point, Michael violently attacked her with a crowbar. Their daughter, Jade, was lying next to Annie in bed during the horrific incident. Michael continued to beat Annie on the head with increasing brutality. Despite her attempts to fight back, Annie eventually died of her injuries on that same bed. Michael contacted his wife, Dawn, asking her to come immediately. He then placed Annie's body in a large bag and put it in the trunk of his car, where he also had a can of gasoline. He drove with Dawn and their daughter Jade in the back seat for about 100 miles. When they reached a quiet area on the side of the road, Michael took Annie's body out of the trunk, doused it with gasoline, and set it on fire. After making sure the fire was burning well, he quickly returned to the car and drove Dawn and Jade back to his mother's house in Savannah. Dawn's revelation was crucial evidence in the investigation. The police asked Dawn to make a recorded phone call to Michael to talk about Annie's murder. Dawn agreed and called Michael, expressing her concern about the discovery and identification of Annie's body. Michael's response was, "No, they didn't." During the call, Dawn told Michael that blood had been found in their old apartment and that Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents suspected they were involved in a murder. She encouraged Michael to come up with an explanation for the blood. Michael responded, "Okay, we need to work together and come up with a solution." Although he did not admit anything directly, his demeanor showed that he understood the seriousness of the situation. At the end of the conversation, Michael warned Dawn to be careful with her phone calls and assured her that they would work together to resolve the situation. Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents took Dawn to the crime scene to search for any remaining evidence. To protect her identity and ensure her safety as a cooperating witness, they disguised her before arriving at the apartment. Dawn carefully described and demonstrated where Annie's body was and the sequence of events. She pointed out a spot near the wall and baseboard where a significant amount of blood had seeped into the carpet and concrete floor below. Since Michael had moved out, the landlord had replaced and cleaned the carpet several times, which explained the lack of visible evidence. However, when the police used a special chemical on the concrete floor, a large purple stain appeared, indicating the presence of protein and confirming Dawn's account of where Annie's body had been. Despite the blood on the concrete, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents had difficulty confirming that the substance was blood, so they continued to search for more physical evidence. Dawn pointed to a nightstand containing a television next to the bed where Annie had been killed. She noted that blood had splattered on the television during the murder, and Michael had said that it needed a thorough cleaning. He had then disposed of the television, possibly selling it rather than throwing away a working appliance, given his frugal habits. Finding the television was difficult, but the agents were determined to find it. At this point, Michael Palin realized that the Naval Criminal Investigative Service was watching him, especially after a phone call with his ex-wife, Dawn. Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents were concerned that Michael might flee, or that he might threaten witnesses, harm them. On October 11, 1995, Michael attempted to escape, but was quickly apprehended and taken into custody by police. While Michael Palin was in police custody on suspicion of murder, Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents worked tirelessly to find and interview all the residents of the apartment complex where the murders took place in November 1989. Their efforts were rewarded when they spoke with a neighbor who said he had purchased a television from Michael. Amazingly, the television was still working and in the neighbor's home. The police quickly confiscated the television and sent it to the FBI lab for forensic analysis. This investigation led to a crucial discovery: analysis found 11 blood stains inside the speaker. These blood samples were later compared to Annie's DNA, providing crucial evidence in the murder case. At this point in the case, Michael's attorney announced that he was willing to plead guilty, but only if the death penalty was removed from consideration. The prosecutor was not pleased with this development, but military law required such a plea bargain to be negotiated at trial. Michael admitted his guilt, recounting the details of his crimes objectively, his account showing no signs of remorse or empathy. As a result, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He was also dishonorably discharged from the Navy. Dawn Breeze, who knew about her husband's crimes and remained silent for more than 6 years, escaped legal consequences thanks to her crucial confession to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, which greatly aided the investigation. Annie's children now know the truth about their mother's tragic fate and understand that she did not abandon them. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Chris Watts. Shanann and Chris Watts. The two met in 2012 and were both from North Carolina, with Shanann from Aberdeen and Chris from Spring Lake. They got married on November 3, 2012. Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, did not attend the wedding due to their strained relationship with Shanann. Cindy later explained that she didn't get along with Shanann and felt she treated her son poorly. After a year of marriage, Shanann and Chris made a significant decision to buy a new home in Frederick, Colorado. This move marked a new beginning for the couple as they started their life together in their new home. Shanann's lifelong dream of becoming a mother finally came true on December 17, 2013, with the birth of her daughter, Bella. 2 years later, on July 17, 2015, she welcomed her second daughter, Celeste. Those who knew Shanann described her as a kind and compassionate person who radiated love and positivity. She always strived to create the best life for herself and her family. As a mother, Shanann loved her two daughters, Bella and Celeste, more than anything in the world. Shanann was devoted to providing her children with the care and support they needed to thrive. Bella, the older of the two sisters, was a compassionate and caring child who naturally took on a protector role with her younger sister Celeste. From a young age, Bella showed a strong desire to look out for Celeste's well-being. Celeste, on the other hand, was a lively and energetic child who brought joy and laughter to everyone around her. Shanann was active on social media, using it to share videos that showcased her personality in daily life. Her friends and family enjoyed these videos, which often featured her husband Chris and their daughters. In her posts, Shanann frequently expressed her deep love and gratitude for Chris. While Shanann's loved ones admire their happy marriage, they also noticed that Chris tends to be reserved and not easily approachable. However, because Shanann clearly loves him, they respect his presence in Shanann's life. In June 2015, Shanann and Chris Watts faced severe financial difficulties and decided to file for bankruptcy. The couple struggled with a large mortgage, car payments, loans, and medical bills, in addition to a substantial amount of credit card debt. At the time, Chris worked at Anadarko Petroleum, while Shanann was employed at a hospital call center. A year later, in 2016, Shanann began a new career as a consultant for a multi-level marketing company called Unravel, where she sold a nutritional supplement called Thrive, which was delivered through a patch. Her colleagues say Shanann is passionate about her work, with one colleague describing her as having a charisma that makes everyone feel welcome and supported. Although Shanann was happy with her life with Chris and their two daughters, she had always dreamed of having a third child, a baby boy, to complete their family. Her wish was granted in spring 2018, when she discovered she was pregnant for the third time. Elated by the news, Shanann planned a surprise for Chris. She waited for him to return home on May 28. Chris walked into the room, not knowing the surprise that awaited him. when Shannon revealed that she was pregnant with a baby boy. After hearing the news, both Chris and Shannon were overwhelmed with joy. They decided to name their unborn child Nico. During the summer of 2018, while pregnant with Nico, Shannon visits her family in North Carolina. Chris stays behind in Colorado for work. While in North Carolina, Shannon takes her daughters to visit Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie. During the visit, Cindy offers Celeste a snack. Despite knowing that Celeste has a severe nut allergy, Cindy gives Celeste a snack containing peanuts. This incident upsets Shannon, who feels that Cindy has put Celeste's life in danger. Shannon was upset and sent a text message to Chris expressing her frustration. She told him he should call his dad and tell him how he felt about his mom putting their daughter's safety at risk that day. Shannon believed Chris's mom was trying to upset her by taking risks with their child's life. While Shannon was visiting family in North Carolina, she noticed a change in Chris's communication style. He stopped responding to her messages and calls, which left her confused. When she asked him about it, Chris said he was busier at work due to new employees and that everything was fine. Despite his reassurance, Chris's sudden lack of communication concerned Shannon. On July 31st, Chris flew from Colorado to North Carolina to join Shannon and their daughters, Bella and Celeste, for the week. The girls were excited to see their dad, and as soon as Chris stepped off the plane, they ran to him, eager for hugs. Chris picked them up and held them tightly. Chris's behavior toward Shannon was clearly different. He didn't greet her with a kiss, just a nod of acknowledgement. Shannon felt hurt and couldn't understand why Chris would act this way. She opened up to a friend via text message, expressing her concern that Chris had changed. Shannon's texts were filled with sadness and confusion. She told her friend that Chris was ignoring her, and they were barely communicating, even when they were in the same room. Instead of talking face-to-face, they were exchanging messages on their phones. Shannon even sent a picture to her friend, showing her and Chris sitting on separate couches, facing away from each other. In her messages, Shannon revealed her suspicions that Chris might be having an affair. Shannon confided in her friend that Chris had told her he no longer believed they were compatible, which left her heartbroken. Desperate to save their family, she proposed that they seek couples counseling to work through their issues. She was willing to make concessions and put in the effort to repair their relationship. However, Chris refused to consider counseling. Shannon soon realized that Chris was not willing to meet her halfway or make any compromises. Despite her efforts to save their relationship, Shannon came to understand that Chris was not interested in finding common ground or working through their problems together. After returning to Colorado from a trip to North Carolina, Shannon, Chris, and their daughters settled back into their normal routine. However, Shannon's return was short-lived, as she soon left for a business trip to Arizona. While in Arizona, Shannon's friends noticed a change in her behavior. She seemed anxious and upset, rather than her usual happy self. One evening, Shannon opened up to her friends in their hotel room, sharing her concerns. She told them that Chris had expressed doubts about their relationship and refused to attend couples therapy. On August 11th, while Shannon was with her friends in Arizona, she received a notification about a restaurant charge on the credit card account she shared with Chris, which raised her suspicions. She couldn't shake off the feeling that Chris might be seeing someone else. Around 1:48 a.m., Shannon returned home from her business trip. Shannon's close friend Nicole Atkinson drove her home. Footage from their doorbell camera confirmed that Shannon had indeed entered her house on August 13th. However, as the day progressed, Shannon failed to send her usual good morning messages, alarming her friends. A missed OB/GYN appointment scheduled for 9:30 a.m. did little to quell their concerns. However, when Shannon missed another engagement, a 12:30 p.m. business meeting, Nicole's concerns escalated, realizing something was seriously wrong as Shannon was now uncharacteristically incommunicado for the entire day. Nicole had a nagging feeling that something was wrong and decided to drive to Shannon's house. As she approached the house, her anxiety spiked. Shannon's truck was parked in a garage, which was very unusual. Nicole went to Shannon's house and knocked on the front door, hoping Shannon would answer and explain that she was just tired from her flight the day before. But Shannon didn't respond. Nicole contacted Shannon's husband, Chris, to see if he knew where she was. Chris told her not to worry, thinking that Shannon might have taken their daughter to visit a friend. However, this explanation did not make sense. Shannon didn't have any plans to meet up with her friends, and they were starting to get concerned. They told Chris that they were going to report Shannon and their daughters, Bella and Celeste, missing to the police. Chris didn't want to involve the police, but Nicole was worried about her friend and decided to call 911 to report them missing. When the police arrived at Shannon and Chris's house, an officer from the Frederick Police Department spoke with Nicole. The officer's body cam footage showed that Nicole was clearly distraught about her missing friend. As Nicole was explaining everything she knew about Shannon and her daughters, Chris arrived at the house. However, unlike Nicole, he didn't seem particularly worried about their disappearance. During the search of the house, the officer found Shannon's purse, which was surprising since she and her daughters were missing. Inside the purse, the officer discovered medication for Shannon and her two daughters, which added to the concern. The discovery of the purse made Nicole even more anxious, but Chris remained calm. The officer also found Shannon's wedding ring, left on the bedside table, which seemed unusual given the circumstances. The officer and Chris then went to a neighbor's house to review footage from their security camera. The camera's angle captured part of the driveway and garage of Shannon and Chris's house, which might provide some clues. Chris can be seen on footage opening the garage door and leaving his home at 5:28 a.m. While reviewing the footage, Chris's behavior changed dramatically, appearing nervous and agitated. His neighbor even commented on Chris's unusual behavior, expressing doubts to the officer about Chris's actions. Chris's reluctance to join the search for his missing wife, Shannon, and their daughters, Bella and Celeste, raised concerns with Shannon's friends. They found it incomprehensible that Chris was not worried about his family's disappearance. As the investigation continued, officers went door to door in the neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen Shannon or anything out of the ordinary. The search for Shannon, Bella, and Celeste intensified the next day, with the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation joining the effort. The Boulder Police Department also provided cadaver dogs to aid in the search, both on the property and inside the house. As officers searched the home, one handler observed that the house had a strong smell of cleaning solutions and appeared unusually clean. This sparked suspicion, prompting the officers to take a closer look. The presence of cleaning solutions suggested that someone may have attempted to conceal evidence or erase potential clues. Meanwhile, Chris gave an interview to a news station outside his home. He insisted that he and Shannon had not argued before she went missing, and expressed his wish for his family to return home safely. Chris expressed his longing to be reunited with his family, stating that his house felt incomplete without them. However, his behavior during the interview raised suspicions. Despite his emotional words, Chris appeared detached and unemotional, which puzzled those who knew him. Shannon's friends who watched the interview felt his behavior was inconsistent with his pleas for his family to return, and that only added to their concerns. On August 14, Agent Coder interviewed Chris again. During the conversation, Chris suggested that Shannon may have taken the girls to a friend's house to relax. Meanwhile, the police department had received multiple reports of possible sightings of Shannon and her two daughters. Chris was shown various photographs, but he was unable to identify any of the individuals as his missing wife and daughters. Agent Coder also asked Chris about his marriage to Shanann. Chris claimed that he had never been unfaithful to Shanann and, to his knowledge, she had never cheated on him either. During an interview with Agent Coder, Chris exhibited suspicious behavior, frequently touching his neck with his hands. This caught Agent Coder's attention. The lack of updates from the authorities only intensified the family's desperation. After a 3-hour interrogation, Chris was released from the police department, but he was asked to return the following day, August 15th, for a polygraph test, to which he agreed. On August 15th, Chris picked up his father from the airport and then drove to the Frederick Police Department, where he was scheduled to take a polygraph test. The test was administered by Tammy Lee, a polygraph expert from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. During the test, Chris denied any involvement in his wife Shanann's disappearance and claimed he had no knowledge of her whereabouts. However, his test results showed a score of -8, which was significantly lower than the -4 score needed to pass. This outcome led detectives to believe that Chris was responsible for the deaths of his wife and daughters. Tammy Lee, the polygraph expert, confronted Chris about his failed test results. Chris admitted to causing Shanann emotional pain, but denied physically harming her. He also confessed to having an affair with a coworker and expressed regret for his infidelity. However, he continued to deny any involvement in his family's disappearance. Later in the interview, Chris asked to speak to his father, Ronnie. The officers hesitated, worried that Ronnie's presence might cause Chris to ask for a lawyer. However, they let Ronnie into the interrogation room, hoping that Ronnie's presence might encourage Chris to confess. When Ronnie arrived, Chris told his father that he had killed Shanann, claiming that he did so because Shanann had harmed their daughters, Bella and Celeste. The detectives did not believe for a moment that Shanann had hurt her daughters. Chris eventually confessed to burying Shanann in a shallow grave at one of his work sites and disposing of the bodies of their daughters in oil tanks. Chris pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At his sentencing hearing, the judge stated that Chris's crimes were the most inhumane and brutal he had ever seen. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Samantha Knight and Renee Aitken. Samantha Knight was born in 1977. She lived with her parents in the suburbs of Menly, Australia. But her parents' relationship did not last long, and they divorced. Then, she and her mother moved to Bronte. When she was in 6th grade, they relocated again, this time to Bondi, a suburb of Sydney, where they settled in an apartment on Imperial Street. Their lifestyle was modest. Her mother worked long hours, which forced her to be independent. Her father frequently visited and provided financial support. On August 19th, Samantha, a schoolgirl, turned 9 years old. After classes ended at 4 p.m., she returned home around 4:15 p.m., while her mother was still at work. In the 1980s, it was common in the suburbs to use simple door latches. The neighborhood was calm and safe, and everyone knew each other, allowing children to stay home alone in locked houses while their parents worked. This was considered normal, so Samantha had the freedom to come and go from their apartment while her mother was at work. August 19th was just like any other day. After school, Samantha changed into a pink skirt, a dark blue jumper, and blue sandals before heading out for a walk. A few hours later, her mother, Tess Knight, returned home from work and found a half-eaten sandwich in the kitchen, but little girl was missing. Tess wasn't initially worried, as it was common for Samantha to go for walks with friends and sometimes skip meals to do so. She continued with her evening routine, expecting her daughter to return soon. However, as it got darker, Tess began to feel anxious. Samantha usually came home before dark, and her absence was concerning. She decided to search for her daughter. Since they had recently moved to the area, not many people knew her, making the search more difficult. She asked neighbors, acquaintances, and Samantha's friends if they had seen her, but no one had any information, which heightened her alarm. Without a mobile phone, she couldn't call Samantha or track her whereabouts. When she returned home, Tess checked again to see if Samantha had come back while she was out, but she was still missing. In a state of urgency, she called emergency services to report her daughter's disappearance, Samantha. Soon after, the police came to her house. They spoke with she to gather details about Samantha's disappearance. She was confused and said she didn't know what had happened because she was at work. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the area, so the police had to rely on tips from witnesses who might have seen something unusual. Police immediately interviewed neighbors, friends, family members of Samantha and anyone nearby for clues. Several store employees reported seeing the girl. Samantha had visited at least 3 different sections of the store selling office supplies, and she was last seen walking down the street. Some witnesses thought she might have been talking to a man. However, they did not find anything suspicious. The police had no other leads. They thoroughly searched the area and followed the route Samantha had taken, but they did not find anything relevant to the investigation. The public was soon informed about the incident. The police requested assistance from local residents through the media, sharing Samantha's photo and description of clothing. Local residents acted quickly. The very next day, hundreds of volunteers participated in a search operation throughout the city. The media also extensively covered this tragic incident. The possibility that Samantha had left home was not even considered. She was too young. At her age, kids typically do not run away from home to spend time with friends. All of her belongings were still at home, and she had never displayed any rebellious behavior before. Samantha was a sweet, kind, and calm girl who worked hard in school, leading detectives to believe she had been kidnapped, possibly taken from her home by someone who maliciously opened the door. Local residents is extremely uneasy. There had never been a kidnapping in their quiet suburb. Residents began to scrutinize one another, fear that the criminal may be living in their area. Investigators had little information to investigate, relying mainly on interviews with local shopkeepers. Unfortunately, no one could provide useful leads to help locate Samantha. The investigation was further complicated because in the 1980s and 1990s, methods of tracking missing persons were not well developed. There were no alert systems like Amber Alerts, no DNA testing, and other modern investigative techniques. Therefore, law enforcement agencies need to conduct searches as efficiently as possible. For instance, they created a mannequin dressed like Samantha the day she disappeared to help jog the memories of those who witnessed it, but this did not produce the expected results. Tess was heartbroken. Samantha's father also joined the search for daughter. Initially, he was even considered a suspect, as investigators thought he might have kidnapped his daughter to keep her with him. However, he denied these accusations. He explained that he maintains a peaceful and respectful relationship with his ex-wife and sees his daughter regularly. There was no reason for him to kidnap her. When the investigation gets difficult, detectives must try their best to identify suspects. The relatives of Samantha began to lose hope of finding her alive and feared the worst. Police are also leaning towards the theory that the girl may have died, possibly taken by human traffickers and taken to another country. This theory was explored, but for 12 years, there is no evidence to confirm this. When the police received a significant lead from a woman, they focused on a local resident named Michael Guider. He lived near where Samantha had disappeared, had been in prison since 1996 for child rape and may be a suspect in Samantha's disappearance. Michael's life is full of disgusting incidents. Born in 1950, he grew up in Melbourne with an alcoholic mother and a younger brother named Tim, born in 1953. Eventually, their mother sent them to an orphanage, where Michael faced further sexual abuse from older children, many of whom were under the influence of drugs. Other children also suffered violence, including Tim, but they all remained silent due to threats. Michael's mental health becomes increasingly serious, and as he matures, he begins to negatively impact the other children in the orphanage. When he was 15 years old, he escaped and began a life of petty crime. His younger brother, Tim, no better, he committed armed robbery and was imprisoned for it. After serving his time, Tim seemed to reform. He became a sculptor, got married, and had children, staying out of trouble and off criminal records. In contrast, Michael continued his criminal activities and showed no intention of changing. He never held a steady job and only worked part-time as a gardener, mowing lawns for neighbors. Michael's first arrest came in the 1970s, when he was charged with setting fire to a store. As an adult, he developed a passion for Australian Aboriginal culture and became knowledgeable about rock art. However, in 1996, he was convicted of sexual offenses for molesting 11 children, aged 2 to 16. At least 60 similar charges were brought against him. Some sources suggested that the actual number of victims could be much higher. During the investigation into the child abuse cases, Michael quickly cooperating with the police. This was taken into account during the sentencing. As a result, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Michael usually acts in a consistent manner. He targeted vulnerable single mothers, often those who struggled with alcohol or drug addiction, or those who were easily influenced. By building trust with these women, he presented himself as kind and courteous, manipulating their perceptions to lower their guard. He often sought opportunities to be alone with their children, claiming he wanted to care for them while their mothers were away. Mothers noticed his attentive behavior and had no qualms about leaving him with their children. By posing as a caregiver, he gained access to the children, which he exploited. Michael would give the children Coca-Cola that was laced with sleeping pills. Once they were unconscious, he photographed and sexually assaulted them. Eventually, some children had the courage to tell their mothers about Michael, and the truth was revealed that he was acting like a serial predator. When the police searched his home, they discovered a large stash of photos, numbering in the thousands. Several photos showed instances of sexual abuse while the victim was unconscious, including images of Samantha and one of her friends without clothes. In one of the photos, police discovered the best friend of Samantha. At that time, she was already 21 years old, and detectives attempted to speak with her. However, both she and her mother refused to cooperate. Eventually, they were summoned to court and compelled to testify. Investigators are looking into a connection between Michael, a serial rapist, and Samantha's disappearance. Among the evidence found, police discovered a peculiar album containing newspaper clippings about missing children, including Samantha. Detectives were curious about why he kept these clippings. Normally, criminals often do this to gather mementos related to their crimes. During questioning, Michael claimed he was simply interested in unsolved cases out of curiosity. While this album was not a major issue, when combined with other elements of his criminal record, it raised serious concerns. After reviewing all the evidence, including photographs of violent scenes, police filed 11 additional charges against him. The total sentence for these new crimes was 6.5 years. At that time, investigators were unable to charge Michaels with kidnapping Samantha, but they suspected his involvement in her disappearance and continued to monitor him. While he was in prison, police observed that he was beaten during all interrogations. He endured severe mistreatment, his cellmates attacked and assaulted him, and the guards failing to intervene. In 2000, journalist Denise Hoffman wrote a book about the missing child, Samantha. She was personally acquainted with Michael and highly appreciated his work as a renowned expert on Australian Aboriginal life. He was knowledgeable in this field and had appeared on television. However, despite their friendship and his expertise, Denise had strong reasons to believe that he was linked to the case of Samantha's disappearance. She begins investigating on her own after he confides in her about his wife, who also knows Samantha's mother. Denise noticed that Michael's demeanor changed significantly whenever the conversation shifted to Samantha's case. During these discussions, his expression will change a lot. He began speaking in a strange, muffled tone and appeared increasingly unsettling. This behavior made Denise even more suspicious of him. Unfortunately, Denise were unable to resolve the case and failed to get a confession from Michael. He denied any involvement in Samantha's disappearance, claiming he had only seen her a few times and did not remember her. This was clearly a lie. To assist the police, Michael's younger brother, Tim, agreed to help him confess. Tim underwent intensive training and consulted psychologists to find the most effective method to help Michael tell the truth. Michael was already under significant stress, and as he broke down, he confessed to accidentally killing Samantha in 1986. He described to the detectives what happened the day little girl disappeared. He claimed that he had known Samantha for some time and had earned her trust, which led her to agree to go with him that day. Michael drove her to a remote area in the wilderness. There, he offered her a bottle of CoCA laced with sleeping pills. After she drank it, she lost consciousness. When he began to assault her, she suddenly woke up and started screaming. To silence her, he gave her more sleeping pills, and she passed out again. Afterward, he briefly stepped out of the car for a walk. When he returned, he found that little girl was unresponsive. However, he maintained throughout the interrogation that it was an accident. He claimed he only intended to assault her and never meant to kill her, insisting that he had never killed anyone before. Michael accepts responsibility for his actions towards Samantha, but he did not apologize to her family or leave the courtroom. In 2002, he confessed during the trial to the unintentional murder of Samantha Knight and was sentenced to 17 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years. Samantha's family were outraged by what they considered a lenient sentence, but this was the maximum penalty for manslaughter at the time. The prosecutor called Samantha's best friend as a witness. This girl, who appeared in photographs and was believed to have also been affected by Michael's actions, had previously refused to speak to law enforcement, citing fears of revealing information. Her silence had serious consequences for many children, including the tragic loss of Samantha. She attended court with her mother, who supported her, but their identities were kept confidential. Samantha's best friend mentioned that she often felt lonely when her mother was at work, so she will go for a walk. During those times, she met Michael, who gave her the attention she craved. Friend claimed that Samantha's mother sometimes left she with Michael and even spent the night with him, during which he molested she. However, Samantha's mother firmly denied knowing Michael and insisted that she never left him alone with Samantha. Strangely, the witnesses later retracted their statements about Samantha without providing any reasons. Finding her remains for burial became extremely important. Initially, Michael claimed he couldn't remember where Samantha's body was. However, several years into his prison sentence, he suddenly recalled that he had buried her in Cooper Park, just a 15-minute drive from her home. Yet, he later changed his story again, saying the body was buried a bit farther away than he originally indicated. On the map, he pointed to an area where a yacht club now stands, which was built just a year and a half after Samantha's disappearance. Despite extensive searches in the area using trained dogs, Samantha's remains have never been located. To this day, her body has not been found, and many doubt it will ever be found. In addition, Michael is also suspected in the disappearance of 5-year-old Renee Aitken, who vanished without a trace in South Wales in February 1984. When there was a thunderstorm, her brother went to check on her and noticed she was missing. He found her bed empty and the front door open. He told their parents, who then called the police. They began searching for her immediately. However, there was a storm at the time, so it's possible that all the evidence was washed away. Initially, the main suspect was Brian James Fitzpatrick. A man with a history of child kidnapping. He lived nearby and knew Renee's family. However, he died in a car accident just weeks before his trial. For many years, the case went cold, but in 2013, police revisited the investigation and looked into Michael. At the time of Renee's disappearance, he worked as a gardener close to their home. A family member recognized that he bore a resemblance to a suspicious man who had been seen behind their house. In Michael's scrapbook dedicated to missing children, there were articles and photos of Renee. Researcher Denise Hoffman believed that Renee's case shared similarities with the disappearance of another girl, Samantha, as both were small and light. Michael could have used drugs to incapacitate Renee and sneak her out of the house. Michael was skilled at gaining the trust of children, causing suspicions that he was involved in Renee's kidnapping. Detectives questioned him about the incident, but he denied any involvement. They believed him, even though he had previously denied involvement in Samantha's case, which he later admitted. However, the police concluded there was not enough evidence to charge Michael with kidnapping, and Renee's case remains unsolved. She has not been found. Both the police and Renee's family believe she has likely been dead for a long time. While in prison, Michael developed an interest in Aboriginal culture and history, studying various materials on the subject. He authored several works, which were sent to libraries across Australia. In total, he wrote 16 pieces, ranging from 6 to 28 pages long. He also pursued studies in archaeology and earned a degree in that field. Michael was remarkably intelligent, impressing everyone with his capabilities. He has the potential to become a scientist and can contribute to research projects. However, he chose a path of crime. In 2014, Michael became eligible for parole after serving the minimum term of his imprisonment. This made the public extremely indignant, as many people believed he should remain in prison. Individuals like him will never change and will continue to pose a threat to society. Due to public backlash, Michael's request for parole was not granted and he remains in detention. The public, including Samantha's mother, wants Michael to spend the rest of his life in prison. She continued to suffer from the pain of losing her daughter. She could not give her daughter a proper burial and had never seen any sign of remorse from Michael. Supporters of Michael sought to challenge his sentence. They pointed to his participation in 55 therapy programs in prison, claiming he had undergone rehabilitation and was a model prisoner, he deserving of freedom. He behaved well and did not violate prison rules, leading to his release on September 5, 2019, at the age of 68. As part of the bail conditions, Michael was required to stay under strict supervision for an additional 5 years in a special facility for former prisoners. Police fitted him with a tracking bracelet, and he was given a lengthy list of 56 restrictions. These included bans on visiting public places, playgrounds, and schools, a prohibition on contacting minors, restrictions on leaving the country, a ban on changing his name or appearance. He was also subject to regular checks for drug and alcohol use. Despite these measures, there was no guarantee that Michael, the serial rapist, would refrain from committing further crimes. Even his younger brother, Tim, believed releasing him was a mistake. The public was outraged by his release, they fearing that he was already planning new crimes against children. When Michael was released, he had a large tumor in his groin, which he had refused to treat while in prison due to a lack of trust in the medical staff. After his release, he focused on his health, successfully treating the tumor and managing his heart disease. However, he declined medication to reduce his libido because he believed they would interfere with his other medications. Initially, Michael stayed in a shelter near Long Bay, but when the public discovered his location and began to pursue him, he was moved to a secret location. The public was outraged that once his supervision period ended, he would be completely free, able to change his name and appearance, get married, have children, and travel, opportunities that Samantha would never have. This led many to believe that his sentence was unfair. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of affair Elodie Kulik. At around midnight on January 11, 2002, the French Rescue Service received a heartbreaking call. A woman, her voice panicked, screamed that she had been kidnapped. Other voices could be heard in the background before the noise increased, and the attackers took over the phone, cutting off the call forever. The call left the rescue service extremely worried, but the operators were unable to gather any useful information. Attempts to call the number back were unsuccessful as it was either out of coverage or switched off. The situation led to an investigation into one of the most unusual crimes the police had ever encountered. They had no information, not even the name of the caller. The only option was to investigate the mobile phone number, but at the time, the technology could not accurately track the caller's location, so the technology was of no help. In the early morning hours of January 11, 2002, at around 7 a.m., a random driver in the rural area of Bacardi made a disturbing discovery. He noticed a car that appeared to have been abandoned in a ditch, with damage to the vehicle and the passenger door open. Concerned that the car had been stolen and abandoned, he called the police. When asked if anyone else was nearby, he replied that there was no one around. After making the call, he continued on his way. Since it was a remote area, it took some time for the police to arrive, and they arrived at the scene around 8 a.m. A Peugeot 106 was found upside down in a ditch, which seemed unusual as there was a clear and safe stretch of highway nearby, making it unlikely that it had ended up there by accident. There were no signs of braking or skidding on the road, suggesting the car had intentionally left the sidewalk at a high rate of speed. The keys were still in the ignition, but there was no sign of the driver or any passengers. Police used the license plate to identify the owner. Affair Elodie Kulik, a 24-year-old bank employee who lived nearby. While investigating the abandoned car, her bag was discovered inside, raising concerns for police. The bag contained her money, cards, and keys, but she had disappeared without a trace. Police went to the bank where the affair worked. Bank employees told them she had not shown up for work that day. They then contacted the local hospital, but there were no reports of any victims matching Affair's description. That morning, Affair's father contacted the police to report her absence. He explained that he had tried calling her cell phone, but she did not answer and did not make contact, which was very unusual for her. Normally, if she had any problems, she would always notify her family if she would be late or unable to come home. However, this time, she did not respond and it appeared that she had disappeared. Police began searching the area where her car was found and decided to release a photo to raise public awareness of her disappearance. On the morning of Saturday, January 12, 2002, a worker from a nearby farm went to a landfill 12 kilometers from the station. In the distance, he saw what he initially thought was a tree trunk. However, as he got closer, he was horrified to discover the disfigured body of a woman. He quickly called the police to report his horrific discovery. When the officers arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a horrifying sight, the partially burned and disfigured body of a young woman, showing clear signs of a violent death. Tests are needed to confirm the identity of the body. The body was discovered nearly 6 kilometers away from where her car was found the previous day, which was unusual. Police noted that this area is not frequented by many visitors, it is isolated and not a tourist destination. This suggests that the suspect is likely a local resident. The crime scene was secured and thoroughly searched for evidence. The gendarme discovered a fresh cigarette, but that may have been discarded by the potential killer. Additionally, a condom containing male fluid was located next to the body. Police focused on finding tire tread marks from any vehicle that might have brought the affair to this location, but they were unsuccessful in locating any. All collected evidence was sent to forensic scientists for analysis. On January 12, the police contacted Affair's parents to inform them of the sad news. When the family learned of the incident, the parents were devastated by their daughter's death. Overwhelmed with grief, the mother attempted to end her life. She survived but fell into a coma, remaining in that state for years until her death in 2011. The desperate father was determined to find his daughter's killer. Affair was a highly intelligent and educated young woman. She studied law in northern France and later returned to her hometown of Péronne. At just 23, she was offered a position at a bank, where she excelled and quickly became the youngest director in the bank's history. She took great pride in her career accomplishments. In addition to her career success, Affair was also very beautiful, with blonde hair and blue eyes. The forensic examination of Affair's car determined that it was traveling at a low speed. There were no signs of collision with another vehicle, raising the possibility that someone inside the car might have deliberately driven it into the ditch. When police checked Affair's mobile phone, they found a call to the local rescue service shortly after midnight. The call ended suddenly after she managed to scream. Police retrieved a 26-second recording filled with noise and unidentified male voices. While this recording did not provide clear evidence, it was notable because it indicated male involvement during the incident. The autopsy results showed that Affair died painfully from strangulation, and DNA evidence indicated that she had been raped. However, this DNA did not match any profiles in the database, suggesting her attacker had no prior criminal history. Police believed that the suspect's careless handling of the DNA would eventually lead him to reveal himself again. However, this assumption raised concerns, as it could result in another victim, so they could not afford to wait. Police organized street patrols and collected DNA samples from all male acquaintances of the affair. If these efforts did not lead to results, the search would expand to the surrounding area near the crime scene. The instincts of the gendarmes proved correct. Just 10 days after finding Affair's body, a police commissioner from another precinct arrested a man named Kirill, who had a history of sexual violence. He was in the area on the night of the disappearance and later attacked another woman, who reported the incident. While Kirill admitted to harassing this woman, claiming it was just harmless flirting, he denied any involvement in Affair's murder. The investigation of Kirill involved checking his car, which had scratches containing gray paint. This paint matched the color of the Peugeot 106 driven by Affair. DNA samples were taken from Kirill for comparison. However, the analysis showed that the paint did not match Affair's car, and Kirill's DNA did not match any evidence from the crime scene. As a result, Kirill was released, and further inquiries into Affair's acquaintances did not produce any new leads. The case has no prime suspect and no new leads. It seems the investigation has reached a dead end. Meanwhile, Affair's grieving father Jackie remains closely involved in the investigation and begins his own investigations. In order to quickly find the culprit, he ensures that the case is widely reported in the media, hoping that this will lead to new leads. On April 15, 2002, 3 months after Affair's body was discovered, new clues emerged in the case. The police received a detailed report from audio experts who had analyzed the recording of Affair's last call to emergency services. The experts carefully filtered out the background noise and identified 2 distinct male voices among the cries for help. One voice was calm and tried to reassure the victim, while the other, more aggressive, argued that she needed to be killed. They noted that the attackers had a heavy accent typical of an area called Picard, which happened to be close to where Affair's body was found. However, this information did not make the police's task any easier. They still lacked data, and the search for a new suspect was slow, with the assumption that 2 men were involved. After 6 months of unproductive investigation, the police department received a call from a farmer in Turtree. On July 8, 2002, he reported discovering a young girl's body on a haystack while heading to work. The shocking scene also revealed another mutilated body. Forensic experts, horrified by the brutality, noted that her limbs were dislocated and her body showed signs of having been run over by a vehicle. This location was only 30 kilometers away from where a fare had previously been found. The victim was identified as Patricia, a clerk who was known for riding her bicycle. She had gone missing just days before the farmer's discovery. Notably, similar items were found at this crime scene. Patricia was recognized as a beautiful girl who worked in a restaurant in Alberta. It was clear to police that these cases were linked, as such violent incidents had never occurred in this previously peaceful area. Witnesses who saw Patricia shortly before her death reported that a black sedan was following her bicycle on the street. At the time, they did not think much of it. Unfortunately, this was all the information the police could gather. The witnesses could not remember the car's make, model, or license plate. However, the police believed this crime was connected to a previous case, and new information about the black sedan helped narrow down the search. The media quickly picked up the story, increasing public fear and spreading rumors about a possible serial killer. The police's struggle to solve the case led to the discovery of a third body on August 21, 2002. In Villa-Brentoni, a van was found abandoned near the railroad tracks. And inside it, police discovered a third young girl who had been wounded by a bladed weapon and died from internal bleeding. Unlike the earlier victims, this girl's identity was unknown because no one had reported her missing. The police spoke with local residents and learned about the parents of a daughter who had not returned home the night before. They thought she was out with friends. Upon investigation, they recognized the victim as their 18-year-old daughter, Crestel. She was killed approximately 40 kilometers from where the first victim was found. In just 7 months, the gendarmes encountered 3 similar murders of young girls, each caught by the criminals at night on roads between settlements. The locations of these crimes on the map created a triangle that the media called the Triangle of Death. This situation caused public anxiety to escalate, leading residents to hold a memorial procession to express their fear for safety. Even with more police patrols and checkpoints, attempts to gather new evidence and testimonies from other potential victims were unsuccessful. However, by the end of November 2002, the investigation into the second Patricia victim's murder produced new leads. DNA found on the victim's clothing identified a suspect named Jean-Paul Conti, marking an important breakthrough for the police. Police arrived to question Conti, a man who had served 17 years in prison for a series of rapes. When he saw the police, he was very surprised. He remained calm and did not attract the attention of those around him. His home was located in the Triangle of Death, which included the locations where the 3 victims were found. Conti was arrested in the early morning of November 25, but police needed more evidence to link him to the murders. His DNA was only found on the clothing of the second victim, and there were no traces on the first and third victims. The investigation later determined that he was only involved in the murders of the second and third victims, resulting in a life sentence. In addition, it was confirmed that he could not have been involved in the murder of Affair, as he was in prison at the time. This indicates that the cases of Affair and the other victims are unrelated, revealing that there are at least 2 killers operating in the area, targeting young girls. The investigation resumed with meticulous efforts to identify all mobile devices that may have been in the vicinity where the body and a gray Peugeot 106 were discovered. A total of 14,000 signals were recorded and needed analysis. Specialists undertook a massive task that included reviewing over 600 sent messages, listening to more than 10,000 conversations, collecting 5,500 DNA samples from found mobile phones and conducting thousands of interviews. Police examined over 500 theories related to the crime, but none provided any leads. The department received numerous anonymous letters identifying various individuals as potential killers. Police followed up on these leads, which consumed a lot of resources, but ultimately did not advance the case. After a lengthy period, police offered a reward of €60,000 for information leading to the capture of the real criminal. However, this also failed to yield results, leaving the police at a standstill. 9 years after Affair's body was discovered, a new police officer joined the investigation. He was a young specialist with a fresh perspective and new skills. He suggested a method that focuses on analyzing the DNA found at the crime scene to search for close relatives of the DNA's owner, rather than just the owner themselves. This innovative technique was used for the first time in France in this case and proved to be a significant breakthrough in the investigation. Progress was made in November 2011 when police identified a relative of the killer. Evidence strongly suggested that the killer was part of the Wired family. It was believed that the elderly man was not involved, meaning that the perpetrator was likely his son. The Wired family had lived in the area for nearly 50 years and their son, Gregory Wired, was a 23-year-old plumber at the time of the murder. To protect the information, police kept his identity a secret for several weeks. However, they were disappointed to discover that Gregory Wired had died in a traffic accident shortly after the Affair murder in November 2003, which was officially ruled a fatal accident. The Gregory's death shortly after Affair's murder explained why his DNA was not found during random sampling of local residents from 2002 to 2010. His profile closely matched the description of the criminal. Gregory, known to his friends as a motorsport racing enthusiast, was cheerful but had a violent streak. He abused alcohol and often lost control when intoxicated, making him prone to aggression. To conduct a DNA examination of the suspect, authorities decided to exhume his body from the cemetery for testing. The results revealed a complete match, identifying one of the killers. The next step for the gendarmerie was to find the owner of the second voice from Affair's last call recording. They began by investigating Gregory's immediate circle. The police aimed not only to piece together the events, but also to ensure that no further threats existed for other young women. While only traces of Gregory were found on the condom at the crime scene, another male voice was clearly captured on the recording. Police then investigated Willie Bardon, a former plumber and bartender who was a close friend of Gregory's. They had many interests in common, and a recording confirmed that it was his voice. Willie lived nearby, and police knew of his past allegations of violence against women, although those incidents did not result in legal action. Witnesses reported that he had chased them in his car. Despite his troubled past, he had no criminal record, which meant that his DNA was not in the police database. He vehemently denied any involvement in the crime and claimed that the police were mistaken. Ultimately, his DNA was not found at the crime scene. In late March 2013, Gregory's ex-girlfriend assisted police in identifying the voices of Gregory and Willie by listening to a recorded phone call. Willie, who had a recognizable accent, was recognized by people who knew him. Despite this evidence, Willie denied any involvement in Affair's death, maintaining his innocence. Some described him as a kind man, a caring husband and father, while others painted a different picture, noting his impulsive behavior, extramarital affairs, alcohol abuse, and repeated advances toward women. Nevertheless, the case against him went to court. The prosecution's case rested largely on the identification of Gregory's girlfriend's voice and several others. Despite the lack of substantial evidence, the court ruled in favor of the prosecution. In 2019, 45-year-old Willie Bardon was convicted of gang rape, kidnapping, and murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. While in custody, he attempted to end his life to prove his innocence. His lawyers quickly filed an appeal, and which was accepted. They argued that the voice on the crucial recording belonged to someone else. Experts analyzed the recording but could not confirm whether it was actually his voice, as it was unclear and discontinuous. This uncertainty raised doubts about the evidence against him. As a result, his conviction was appealed and Willie was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. He was released from prison on September 25, 2020. The story continues. A new trial began, and on July 1, 2021, Willie was convicted again and sentenced to 30 years in prison. His attorney appealed the decision, but the appeal was rejected. The defense team expressed their commitment to doing everything possible to free this innocent man, but he remains in custody.